Good morning and welcome to Strasbourg. We're in the European Parliament's building. One of the facilities that MEPs have is to be able to use this extensive video bank here. I'm with Nick Griffin, MEP for the North West, and Andrew Bronze for Yorkshire and the Humber. First thing, we've been handed one of these petitions here about persecutions of Christians in the Middle East. Nick, you've already signed it on the way. I'll give it to Andrew, so you can sign that.
Yes. Do you want me to read it out for the sake of
the
viewers?
Why not?
We, members of the European Parliament, are deeply moved by the recent terrorist attack against the Baghdad Cathedral and by the ongoing persecution targeting Christians in the Middle East. We're aware of the anxiety and growing fear in the heart of Christian communities in this region. We desire to be kept informed on a regular basis of any kind of pressure, threat or attack against Christians in the Middle East. So I'm going to sign this now. We just write it down in block capitals first of all.
This, of course, was one of the side effects of the hugely irresponsible and illegal invasion of Iraq. But it took out a secular socialist dictatorship where there was actually religious freedom, and it's turned into a hellhole of Islamic extremism. And this attack was a brutal massacre of a number of Christians, parishioners and priests. There have been a number of them in recent weeks, and it's increasing.
Yeah, well, I know for a fact that both of you have signed things for the Christian community before. We've looked at the way Christians in northern Cyprus are persecuted. It's part and parcel of the business here. The business at hand today, of course, is voting on various things. We've had a big discussion this morning about where we're going. There's a lot of these votes are on fishing. Andrew, the discussion we had today basically highlighted the complications of voting with this, but you had a meeting with people in your constituency with fishermen recently. Can you tell us a bit more about where that went and how that is going to impact on what you're doing today?
Yes, the Whitby Gazette took the initiative to have a meeting between local fishermen, local trawlermen and elected representatives. There are 6 MEPs for Yorkshire and the Humber. 2 of us turned up. The other 4 didn't.
Who turned up? Who was it? You and
I turned up, and Godfrey Bloom of UKIP turned up. The other 4, 2 of them Liberals, and 1 a Conservative, and who's the other one?
I don't know.
Labour, yes. They all gave their excuses. They might have been good excuses, but we've yet to hear what they are.
A bit of a poor show, really.
It was indeed. And, of course, the local MP didn't turn up either.
No.
I'm pretty sure the real reason they didn't turn up was that they weren't prepared to face these fishermen, because they realised the only long-term solution to preserve our fishing industry is to withdraw from the EU.
I think there's another reason, actually, and that's that I think there's been something like 80,000 jobs in the fishing industry destroyed since 1973 when we joined. Quite simply, there's not any significant votes anymore left in the fishing industry. Therefore, the big politicians simply
they
aren't
can be
interested.
disregarded. That's absolutely right.
How were you treated? I mean, a MEP steps into a meeting of fishermen. Was there any?
It was entirely professional. They weren't interested in party politics at all. They were interested in the fact that 2 of us were interested to learn and to listen, and the other 4 appeared not to be. There was a lot of anger at the absence of the others, but it wasn't party political anger. I don't want to try.
It was merely that they hadn't bothered to take the
time off.
It was certainly a very useful thing, because the information you got from them, basically their shopping lists of things that they need desperately to stay in business. You and I were both able to use in speeches yesterday in the fishing debates. I found it very useful. It was really good.
The point that I made is that, of course, the long-term future of the fishing industry is dependent on getting out of the EU. But I was at pains to stress that this isn't going to happen in the next decade or more, and therefore the fishermen there, in order to survive, need the common fisheries policy to be tweaked. So I said that I see my job in the short term to be an effective lobbyist for changes, to avoid, for example, the number of days they're allowed to go out fishing to be reduced from 135 down to a mere 90, to avoid the monstrous policy of discarding fish because they are in excess of the species quota or because they're undersized, bearing in mind that these fish are dead or dying by the time it comes to be discarded. So this isn't a case of conservation, it's a case of quite blatant waste.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And I don't think they can complain too much if you're there on a meeting on Friday and then you're in Strasbourg actually saying their points in the middle of the European Parliament.
Yes, indeed. The first working day following that meeting, not only did I give a speech, but our chairman took the trouble to get a catch the eye. And they can't really complain about that.
No. Well, on the agenda today, it's not too much about British fishing. We've got tuna fishing in the Solomon Islands. We've got the anchovy fishing in the Bay of Biscay. We've got horse mackerel, and we've got various other measures. But one thing I've noticed, Nick, is that they are beginning to drift away from this ridiculous quota and discards policy, aren't they? There's a first indication that they were picking up on some of the Norwegian, Icelandic and Faroe Islands methods of fishing that are more sensible, are they not? Yeah,
indeed. It is slightly ironic here that they're talking about, oh, we've got to save the fisheries and we've got to have this policy and that policy. The key reason that fisheries are being fished to extinction is European rules they've already been imposing. And the discards thing, which was basically it's the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So they said, right, too many fish are being caught, so the answer is that if you catch more fish of a certain species than you're allowed to, you have to throw them back. But of course they're being thrown back dead anyway. And the Norwegians and the British fishermen were saying this is a terrible system, and that it should be you have to have limits, but it should be weight-based limits, for instance, and that if fish excess are caught, then one very sensible suggestion is that they could be brought back to harbour, but then sold only for the cost of the catch. So it avoids the fishermen going bust, but it gives no incentive to people to fish stocks to extinction. So they are beginning to recognise and to come up with sensible ideas. But it's partly the rules are made by bureaucrats in landlocked Brussels and landlocked Strasbourg, and they simply don't pay attention to the people at the grassroots level. And this is where we can, and we are actually making a difference. And not just us, there were MEPs from various other countries, Ireland and Spain and so on, all are now saying the same thing and pushing the Commission and the bureaucrats to take notice of what ordinary people want. And it is, yesterday was one of the best examples of MEPs who've listened to what they're told by the actual experts, the people in the business, actually having some effect on the bureaucracy of this place. It was a good day yesterday.
It was a good day.
Providing that defective equipment isn't being used and that immature fish are being caught deliberately or recklessly, then immature fish, if they're dead anyway, must be landed. Now, I believe the Norwegian scheme is that 50% of the weight of such fish are counted against their quota. So it's a little bit of a compromise there. Because the difficulty with the North Sea is it's a mixed fishery, or a series of mixed fisheries. And it's very difficult because different species have different minimum lengths. It's very difficult to get equipment that discriminates appropriately between the mature of one species and the immature of another one. So it's inevitable that some immature fish will be caught. But if they're caught, better that they be used rather than simply thrown back into the sea.
Over 800,000 tonnes of dead fish thrown back in the North Sea last year. It really is a huge scandal, and it's good that we're able to do something to start stopping.
Move away from fishing. We've got a vote, for instance, on the closing of coal mines, the subsidised closing of coal mines. Obviously, the carbon the fanatics in this place are pushing towards shutting down any coal mining in Europe. But there again, we've got a difficult position in that our coal mines have already been shut down. We've got another completely strange vote about Irish flooding. Now,
that really is, that's a scandal, because when we had the catastrophic floods in Cumbria, I raised the point immediately with the Commission and in Parliament, and only to be told, well, unless the damage is an enormous sum, millions and millions of euros, no help will be provided. But I don't, obviously, I'm very sympathetic for people in Ireland about all sorts of things, especially the way they've been screwed by their banks. But I don't see how you could possibly have had more damage in floods in Ireland than we had in Cumbria.
Or even in Cornwall recently.
Or even in Cornwall. But while Cumbria and Cornwall gets nothing, we're supposed to be committing ourselves to handing out 30 million euros to Ireland over flood disaster. Now, fair enough if we got it in Cumbria and we got it in Cornwall, but we didn't.
No.
So therefore, overall, it's our money, so that's one we're voting against.
Exactly.
Yes. Coming back to the closure of coal mines, they're not talking about exhausted coal mines.
No.
They're talking about ones that are uncompetitive.
Mm-hmm.
But just as we would say when we had a coal industry, why should Britain have to compete with imported coal? We could extrapolate that and say, well, why should Europe as a whole have to compete with coal from outside of Europe?
There's also the sinister level of this. It's the competing with coal from outside, from China and Brazil and so on, places like that. There's the sinister side that I believe here that coal is essentially a national resource.
Yes.
It belongs to one country, it's under the ground of one country, and that's one reason the people here don't like it. They want wind power, because a wind power system can only work if it's a pan-European thing or hooks up with the grid. And it's not in the end about energy, it's about creating a political force which makes it inevitable that you end up more and more one European country. Then of course with the whole carbon hysteria thing, ostensibly it's just green cranks running this place. It's not really. It's Shell and it's the giant companies that are involved in the alternative energy field, particularly the wind farm nonsense. They're the ones they're deliberately trying to kill coal. And they're using the carbon excuse as a way to do it. So obviously...
it's more about centralisation of power than conservation.
Well, the reality is, of course, that we don't just use coal for heating, generating electricity. It's important in the steel industry as well, and we've voted to indicate that it is important in the steel industry. You can't get away from the fact that you need coal to create steel. There's other aspects where we've voted in amendments, or you've voted, to say that local communities ought to be helped.
Yes.
That imported there, and what a shame it was that those little pit villages in Nottingham and Derby and Yorkshire weren't helped in such a way. And
I think that they still should be helped, because the fact that pits have perhaps gone 20 years ago, there's still nothing worthwhile there. So you look at the consequence of the pits going. One of the consequences is a heroin epidemic in small villages in South Yorkshire. And they still need help. And one of the things that could be done, the British coal industry could be recreated. What was uneconomic. It was uneconomic when oil was extremely cheap. As we're clearly reaching, it's now very, very obvious we've reached the point where all the easy oil has gone. We desperately need real good energy, and wind farms don't hack it.
No,
there's only nuclear power, in due course proper wave power, in which we're still world leaders, but really it's only nuclear power and coal-generated electricity is going to see Britain through an age of austerity.
We still have hundreds of years of coal underneath the ground. We really can't just sort of leave it there. We really must reopen these, obviously with much more modern techniques than we used in the past.
It isn't as simple, though, as it's hard to convey just how complex these things are, because the underlying trend here is to reduce our own independence and reliability, and to actually make us dependent on an EU grid, isn't it? That's what most of this is all about, and we have to approach it from all kinds of different angles when looking at these votes.
I think the worst thing is the way in which they conceal some of the most pernicious legislation within a cuddly, fluffy, pink thing, which if you vote against it, you're a monster. There's one coming up, I'm not sure when, it's not something we've got yet, but the EU is aiming for a power grab over the internet. To give them and bent local politicians through that the power to censor all sorts of things, far right extremist sites and so on, and that's going to be covered by saying, of course we've got to clamp down on child pornography. Well, of course we should clamp down on child pornography, but the laws already exist, and the answer is to toughen it up and to have ferocious penalties for the perverts who deal in this kind of stuff, but to use it as an excuse to censor the internet is really deeply sinister. But it puts anyone in a position that if you're standing up for freedom, they say you're standing up for perverts. It's very clever. It's very wicked.
It certainly is.